A very eventful week. It was a bright Monday morning, and Anna was already awake. She walked into the kitchen, feeling very hungry. She thought about baking a cake for a sweet treat, but she knew that took too much time. Also, it was only 7 a.m., so she certainly wasn't preparing for dinner yet. Instead, she decided to make a classic breakfast. She took out a pan. Soon, the woman was cooking some bacon. She wasn't frying some fish because she didn't like seafood in the morning. On the counter, she was cutting some cucumber and carrot to make a healthy salad for her lunchbox, and she was tasting the food while cooking to make sure it was perfect. Nearby, the woman was boiling water in the pot, and then she was pouring coffee into a cup. When breakfast was done, she was washing the dishes in the sink. Outside, her husband, David, was in the garage. The hood of the car was open. He had a problem with his vehicle. He wasn't fixing the wheel on his bike today. Instead, he was changing the tire on his car. The old tire was broken, but the tire he held was brand new. He was a careful man, so he was wearing safety gloves and he was wearing a tool belt. He wasn't changing the oil in his car or putting air into his tires today, just fixing the wheel. After he finished, he was loading a cart with his heavy tools. It was time to go to work. David decided to take public transport. He walked down the busy street. Pedestrians were crossing the street at the crosswalk, and some cyclists were riding in a line on the street. He saw a bus stop where several passengers were getting on the bus, but David preferred the train. He walked to the station. He was entering the station, and then he was crossing the train tracks safely on the bridge. On the platform, some people were waiting to board the train. When the train arrived, several passengers were getting off the train first. Then David got on. Once all of the passengers had boarded the subway, the doors closed. David arrived at his office building. Inside, it was very quiet. His co-workers were busy. They were sitting in front of computer monitors. All of the men were wearing glasses. One man wasn't using a calculator. Instead, the man was writing something onto the notepad. Another colleague was on the phone. The woman was talking on her cell phone while she was looking at the laptop. Some customer service workers were nearby. The women were wearing headsets, and the men were adjusting headsets. At 10 a.m., David had an important meeting. He walked into the boardroom. The room wasn't empty. In fact, the seated people were all facing the same direction. A manager was standing at the front. The woman was giving a business presentation on a whiteboard. She held a marker, and a diagram was being drawn on the board by the woman. Next to her, the man was giving a presentation in front of a screen, and he was pointing at some information. On the large table, some engineers were checking some blueprints. After a long discussion, everyone agreed on the project. They were signing a contract. Finally, they were shaking hands with each other and sharing business cards. David looked out the office window. Across the street, some workers were building a new shop. They were doing some construction work. All of the people were wearing helmets. Down below, a road was being paved and rocks were being moved by construction workers. Near the wall, one worker wasn't carrying a ladder anymore. He was standing on a ladder. He was painting the door. Another man was holding a heavy tool. He wasn't using a screwdriver to screw a nail. Instead, the man was hammering something into a building frame. At lunchtime, Anna and David met downtown. The weather was beautiful, so they were taking a walk in the park. The park looked very neat because the grass was being mowed by a gardener. Many people were outside. A young woman passed by. She was walking her dog, and the dog was walking behind the girl. They decided to eat at a lovely cafe. There were some tables and chairs outdoors. Because it was noon, the outdoor dining area at the cafe was completely full. Waiters were bringing plates of food to the diners. They found a small table. A friendly waiter came over. The waiter was writing in his notepad while the woman was ordering some food. To protect the customers from the sun, there were plastic umbrellas on the tables, and the umbrellas above the tables were being put up. After work, Anna went to the supermarket. She had some grocery bags. She pushed her cart down the aisle. The store was busy. First, she went to the garden section. She was selecting a flower pot, and then she was paying for a flower pot. Next, she went to a clothing store. A large number of shirts were being displayed on hangers. Customers were trying on some new shirts in the store. Anna bought a beautiful blue shirt. A purchase was being made. The customer was receiving change from the employee, and the cashier was handing some bags to the customer. Finally, shoppers were heading up the escalator, and since the mall was crowded, both sides of the escalator were currently in use. Finally, the weekend arrived. Anna and David loved to travel and stay active. Sometimes they went to the gym. They were running on the treadmills or using exercise bikes. Other times, they traveled far away. They would go to the airport where luggage was being put onto the plane and a large plane was taking off. In the winter, they loved the cold weather. They would drive to the mountains. Resorts were making snow for skiing, and people were skiing down the mountain. Everyone was safe because all of the skiers were wearing helmets. Sometimes they played in the snow. They were having a snowball fight, and the man was throwing a snowball at the wood. But this weekend, it was summer. They went to a quiet lake. A man was fishing in a boat. He was holding a fishing rod. A boy was putting bait on the hook, and the father had his right arm around the boy. When they caught something, he was taking the hook out of the fish's mouth. Later in the afternoon, they visited the beach. Swimmers were having a good time at the beach. People were lying on the beach and sunbathing. A few children were playing in the sand. Some people were making a sand castle on the beach. Anna loved walking by the water, so she was collecting seashells on the shore. On Sunday evening, they stayed at a nice hotel in the city to relax. The hotel lobby was packed with people. At the front desk, some guests were being helped in the lobby. Anna and David went up to their room. It was beautiful. The balcony overlooked the river. Inside, there was a picture on the wall above the sofa. A potted plant had been left on the floor. For extra comfort, cushions were being placed on the sofa. They finally sat down. David wanted to watch the news, so he was turning on TV. Anna wanted to enjoy a quiet story, so she was holding a book in her hand. It had been a very busy week, but they were finally ready to rest.